I don't remember the decision for the MVP of the NFL being as divisive as it has for the 2023-2024 NFL season. Baltimore Ravens Lamar Jackson, Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers, Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, and Buffalo Bills Josh Allen have all played well enough to be considered for the most valuable player in the National Football League. Each candidate brings a unique set of accomplishments, challenges, and narratives that contribute to the broader discussions on who deserves the coveted MVP. Now, in this video, we will look at the case for each contender. Now, it's easy to get caught up in the narratives about who this year's MVP is, but who could you really make the argument for? So then the final question is Lamar Jackson the unanimous MVP? The Josh Allen case is perhaps the most intriguing. Not because of anything he's doing, but because he even has an argument at all, to be honest. Josh Allen is an immensely talented quarterback. Throughout the 2023-2024 NFL season, we got the whole Josh Allen experience. He made unbelievable plays only reserved for the very, very few. When he wanted, he could just tuck the ball and run over, hurdle, or speed past linebackers to get touchdowns. On the season, he has 457 rushing yards along with 15 touchdowns. In the air, Allen has 3,947 passing yards and 27 passing touchdowns as of week 17. His passing yards places him 5th in the league, and his total touchdowns of 42 towers above all others. Regardless of how you put it, 42 touchdowns in a season is an impressive feat. However, with the Josh Allen experience, the highs are almost as impressive as the lows. While his 21 total turnovers aren't great, they're expected from a player who's not only asked to do a lot, but is given much credence to be Superman. From week 1 to week 12, Superman is who he tried to be, accounting for over 80% of the team's offensive scoring. Sure, he would throw horrendous interceptions in inopportune times, but he more than made up for them with his rushing production. Through 12 weeks, he was averaging 36 attempts a game for 3,214 yards, 24 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions on 68 completion percentage. This was an unbelievable pace, but outside of Dan Orlovsky, no one was putting Allen in the MVP conversation. When Orlovsky mentioned it, it was simply contingent on him keeping pace and doing something the Bills had struggled to do all season, win consistently. At this point in the season, the Bills were 6-6 despite Allen's heroic efforts. Sure, we should mention the Bills did lose key players on the defensive side of the ball earlier in the season, but they're still top 5 in scoring, 15th in rushing, and 7th in passing defense. Now, the big contributor against Allen's case is how the Bills have finished the season. Since his whole case was built on gaudy statistics, it's disheartening to see his team winning without him having to put up such big stats. Since week 12, he's averaged 27 attempts per game, passing that is, for 733 yards, 9 touchdowns, and 5 turnovers. His team has certainly stepped up, and he's no longer the Superman that he was earlier in the season, but his team is winning. Had Allen kept pace from earlier in the season, his matchup versus the Dolphins in week 18 to send the Bills into the playoffs would have surely been the crowning moment for Josh Allen, but that hasn't been the case. Tua doesn't have a case, at all. That's it. Tua doesn't have a case. Tyreek Hill's case was built on him breaking the 2,000-yard threshold. And when you watch the Dolphins play, his value clearly overshadowed that of Tua's. Since the MVP is usually given to the quarterback who puts up gaudy stats, this seemed to be the year voters would consider Hill because his performance throughout the season exceeded that of many quarterbacks, and he was on pace to break a record. That's always a big thing. When you watch the Dolphins play, you see the influence he has on the defensive strategies of defensive coordinators, more than a lot of receivers. When he got hurt in the game against the Tennessee Titans, his value became even more pronounced as the Dolphins could barely move the ball. However, entering week 18, Tyreek has 112 receptions for 1,717 yards and 12 touchdowns. I wouldn't put it past the Dolphins to try and get Tyreek the record. After all, they're playing the Buffalo Bills, who need the win, and this could lead to a shootout since both sides, defensively aren't that great. But even if Tyreek does break the 2,000-yard threshold, which is unlikely, does that make him the MVP? He's certainly the offensive player of the year in my mind, but MVP? They are the number one offense in football, and Tyreek Hill is the engine that makes it go. But is he the MVP? Christian McCaffrey has always been him in the NFL. When he was traded to the 49ers, it seemed like a match made in heaven. In 2023, McCaffrey has been all that and more. Now, in 16 games, he has amassed 1,459 rushing yards, over 500 receiving yards, 23 touchdowns on 5.4 yards per carry. McCaffrey's numbers aren't eye-popping for a running back, even by his own standards. When CMC hit 2,000 yards from scrimmage this season, he became the 72nd player all time to accomplish this feat. So in the broader context, his numbers are great, but they're not necessarily elite. However, when we view his season in the vacuum of 2023, you'll know that he leads the league in rushing yards and tied with Raheem Mostert in touchdowns with 21 after 17 weeks. His 5.4 yards per carry also leads the league and towers over everyone with at least 200 carries. Lastly, his 400 yards above the next closest. CMC is surrounded by one of the most loaded offenses of the past few years. That is true. At times, it's almost comical to see him running through wide open gaps and go untouched for 10 yards, especially on the left side. He has Debo, Kittle, and Ayuk, who are some of the best blocking pass catchers in the league. Now, if not for the talent around McCaffrey, he would easily topple 2,000 yards rushing if the team needed that from him, but they take touches from him. Now, whenever his team has provided him with opportunity, he has delivered impressively. His abilities as a runner has made the passing game significantly more efficient. Just watch the Niners when they run a play action. Purdy is throwing to wide open receivers. Sure, part of that can be attributed to the play calling, but a huge reason is because of McCaffrey's ability as a runner. You have to account for him or he'll eat. And when he eats, everybody eats. Now, the one argument against McCaffrey this season, which isn't even necessarily his fault but the byproduct of his position, is that the game kind of gets away from him at times. And what I mean by this is that when the team is losing or they're not doing well, they tend to look elsewhere for the team to have success despite McCaffrey having a good performance. The best example was against the Ravens. When the team was trailing, the onus was then put on Brock Purdy to make plays instead of McCaffrey. They stopped running the ball. Now, when we contrast this to the last running back to win the MVP, Adrian Peterson, the game rarely got away from him. Maybe because, the Vikings had less talent, but AP was getting the ball whether the team was up by 10 or down by 15. McCaffrey, while an elite talent, has had moments to be great just taken away from him and put in the hands of our next candidate, Brock Purdy. Now, we have to admit that Brock Purdy was always an interesting case. His statistical output has been nothing short of legendary. You'll have a lot of naysayers disregard his achievements by putting it on the supporting cast and coach for devising great plays, leaving open receivers for him to throw the ball to. They'll even go further by suggesting that other quarterbacks could do the same in the same system, but they're not him. Jimmy Garoppolo was not this efficient. Also, since when do we fault players for having a great play caller? Two things can be correct. In this case, Purdy has had a great supporting cast all season who have all delivered, but so has Purdy. We can't judge Purdy against past MVPs, and we all have to admit that had he been the first overall selection, he'd get significantly more respect. Now, through 17 weeks, Purdy's second in the league in passing yards with 4,280 yards while being 20th in attempts. He's third in the league in completion percentage at 69.4 and one touchdown behind the leader with 31. His 7.0 TD percentage, QBR of 72.7, net yards per pass attempts of 8.74, and adjusted net yards per pass attempts of 9.01 towers above all others in the 2023 season. All the advanced passing metrics go to Purdy. It's almost comical how efficient of a passer he has been all season, and he deserves all the respect in the world for his accomplishments. However, the case against him is quite pronounced. MVPs are allowed to have bad games, however, this usually occurs at the beginning of the season. Once the season is underway, MVPs tend to show out, especially in big games. Even if their stats aren't great for a game or two in the later part of the season, their performance usually transcends the score sheet and the stats. For Purdy, the first indictment started in Week 6 against the Cleveland Browns and persisted for 3 weeks against the Cincinnati Bengals and the Minnesota Vikings. The Browns defense is legit, so we can give him a pass on that game, which was his worst by far all season. He had 125 yards in the air with 1 touchdown and an interception and a fumble on 44% completion percentage. Again, the Browns did this to a lot of quarterbacks all season, so we'll give him a pass. During the 3-game span, he had 762 yards, 3 touchdowns, 7 turnovers on 61 completion percentage. While this doesn't look horrible, there was one consistent thing throughout these games. The Niners were trailing and missing a key player, and Purdy didn't show out as an MVP should. Despite the 3-game stretch, Purdy stepped it up once again when the players came back from their injuries and the Niners went on to become the juggernaut that we know until Week 16. There is no way else to put it. Against the Ravens, he lost the MVP then and there. The Week 16 billing was his coming out party for those who had never actually seen him play. Regardless of how you look at the interceptions, they were bad. Sure, some could have been attributed to luck, but so could other throws that were not intercepted. This was supposed to be his moment to put an end to the MVP conversation because statistically he is just otherworldly right now. And instead, the Ravens defense made him look average, while their star quarterback, Lamar Jackson, took the spotlight. I can already see how people will regard this MVP season years from now. They will point to the stats and discredit Lamar's value. However, unlike other years, there is a nuanced conversation to be had about the MVP this season. You had to have watched the Ravens play to really understand why he's the MVP. Yes, the Ravens have a vaunted all-time great defense. However, they've had to ask Lamar to win them games, and he has delivered. He's made unbelievable plays to extend the plays and deliver some of the prettiest off-platform throws. His playmaking ability this season stands shoulder to shoulder with any great quarterback that you can think of right now. Entering Week 18, Jackson has a career best 3,678 yards, 24 passing touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. His 8.0 yards per attempts, 8.4 adjusted yards per attempts, and 65.3 QBR all rank him 4th in the league. His 7.0 net yards gained per pass attempts and his 7.34 adjusted net yards per pass attempts place him 3rd. The only quarterbacks ahead of him in the advanced metrics, he's outperformed them when they matched up. But I don't want to go too deep into why I personally think he's the MVP. Instead, I'm going to attack some narratives that his detractors consistently bring up. His lack of touchdowns and the fact that he went 4 games without a single passing touchdown.
Combined, the months of September and November combined, how many touchdown passes would you assume he had? They played 7 games.
I would assume he probably had 9.
He had 6.
Okay, 6.
He had 6 in the month of September and November. He had 5 in this game.
Okay.
But he had 6 in the months of November and September.
Well, what else did he do?
To your point, what else did he do? I'm trying to figure that out, because if you're talking about quarterbacks that won the award, they usually lead the league in some category. They're usually top 5 in some category.
To me, the MVP is somebody who has been kicking ass and taking names week after week. He's also had 4 games this year without a touchdown pass. 4. Then he's had other games where he had 1 touchdown. 2 games, like he has not been.
This is perhaps the laziest argument anyone can make because they're showing their ass. They're telling their viewers that they didn't actually watch the Ravens play. Lamar's first game without a TD was in Week 1 against the Houston Texans. First, the Texans' defense was amazing the entire game, putting pressure on Jackson all game long, which forced him to make some awful decisions and throw an awful pick on 3rd and 6 on Houston's 16-yard line. His fumble wasn't great either, but he was a magician in the pocket, evading sacks and making huge plays to drive the team down the field for his running backs to punch it in. Justice Hill had 2 touchdowns from the 2-yard line. J.K. Dobbins had 4-yard touchdown. Would Lamar throwing a TD have changed the outcome? Because they won the game. Now, Lamar's second game without a passing TD came against the Indianapolis Colts in Week 3. The Ravens didn't play particularly well, and their clock management was abysmal. Lamar had a fumble in the pocket, and despite Gardner Minshew doing his best Dan Orlovsky impression and giving the Ravens 2 points, the team still lost. The Colts were getting pressure on Lamar all day and making him clearly uncomfortable throughout the game. Despite not throwing a touchdown pass, Lamar had 2 beautiful runs for touchdowns, and he continued to do the Lamar things of, evading rushers and making big plays. So could a passing TD have changed the outcome of the game? Sure. But let's remember, Jackson made big plays to set up the greatest kicker of all time at the 61-yard line, and he had made a 63-yarder earlier in his career, and he missed it, which sent it to overtime, and the Colts eventually won. Now, Jackson's third game without a touchdown came against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Week 5. Yes, the interception to Joey Porter wasn't the greatest throw, it was horrendous. But there were clear drop touchdowns in this game. Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman had a drop each in the end zone, and Nelson Aguilar dropped a touchdown, or at least a would-be touchdown, at the 10-yard line. But nonetheless, the Ravens lost 17-10, and if Jackson threw 2 touchdowns, they surely would have won the game. And then the final game where Lamar didn't pass for a TD was against the Seattle Seahawks in Week 9. The Ravens won the game by a wide margin as their defense showed out. The final score was 37-3, and Jackson did Jackson things by extending plays and driving the team down the field for his running backs to punch it in. In fact, with 12 minutes left in the game, Jackson was no longer in the game because they had such a comfortable lead. Throughout these games where Jackson didn't pass for a TD, he was the engine that made the offense go. Believe me, Gus Edwards having 12 touchdowns from within 5 yards wasn't because he drove the team down the field and was getting rewarded for that. Jackson could have easily had 10 more touchdowns if the Ravens chose to go down that route. But sure, let's not talk about what could have been or should have been. Let's talk about what has been done. The Ravens have had a great defense that has to be acknowledged. Offensively, Lamar is the main piece. This season, he has lost his starting running back in J.K. Dobbins, lost another explosive runner in Keaton Mitchell. He lost his starting tight end and safety blanket in Mark Andrews. His starting tackles have missed considerable time, and he's playing in a new offensive scheme this season. Moreover, the Ravens have played the toughest schedule in the NFL this season according to Pro Football Reference, and when they've gone up against the best, Jackson has shown out, unlike other candidates. The Ravens have the second highest scoring offense in the league, second highest total offense, and of course the best rushing offense with Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, and Keaton Mitchell for a few games. But of course, Lamar is the leading rusher for the Ravens with 821 yards as of Week 17, which puts him in the top 20 in the NFL. Now, it's easy to get caught up in the narratives about this year's MVP, but who could you really make the argument for? Sure, Jackson's stats aren't otherworldly, but in any game, he has been the best player on the field on both sides of the ball. So the question is Lamar Jackson the unanimous MVP?